This video is about segmentation. So first of all, a definition. What do we mean by segmentation? Well, in any population you have a mixture of different individuals with different tastes and needs. And the idea of segmentation is to be able to sort them and divide the total market into smaller homogeneous groups of consumers or segments. So they share the same identity and the same characteristics. And we're going to use our qualitative and our quantitative research to be able to identify groups who share similar and distinct needs and characteristics and behaviors. That means that we need to approach them or use marketing strategies which are different from one segment to another segment. Hopefully then, by segmenting, we're going to make the exchange process even better, because we're going to be able to design products or services which perfectly fit the needs and wants of a particular segment of customers. So the segmentation process in itself, first of all, we have to find ways of dividing the market into subgroups or segments. We then need to provide a description of each segment and try to estimate its potential size or the potential demand within a particular segment. To do that, we then need to analyze the competition for a particular segment. So are our competitors already clearly targeting the same group of users or potential customers that we have also identified? And on the other hand, we need to think about the potential marketing mix that we could adopt for each particular segment. So we've got an array of segments, an array of particular potential solutions. We then need to try and predict our market share for each of the potential segments, because we are trying to identify the risks, the costs, and the benefits of each potential segment, so that we can then, at the end of the day, choose the final segment, which is what we call targeting. So choosing the particular segment, or maybe 2 or 3 segments only, which are going to be the most adapted and that we can focus on to maximize our use of our limited resources. So why segment? Well, right at the start of the industrial process, we were very much just getting into in the age of industrialization. And any changes to the standard production were always cause for difficulty. So Henry Ford is famed for having said, apparently, you can have any color that you want as long as it's black, because that was the way they were able to produce as many cars as they could and satisfy a huge demand which was waiting for these cars to come out. They simply couldn't produce them fast enough to be able to satisfy the needs. And people didn't care if it was black. What they wanted was to be the owner of one of the first cars. If we look at the marketplace today, we've got a highly segmented market because every household has a car, and we've made changes to the size, the status, whether they're adapted for cities, whether they're sports, whether they're luxuries. And in each case there are all sorts of different brands available which correspond to the needs of particular segments of cars. So those are the two extremes. On the one hand, no segmentation. On the other hand, a highly segmented approach. So why should we segment? Well, the question is, can I profitably serve all of the customers in the market? And the answer is no, because consumers have too many different needs, and there are too many different kinds of consumers who want different things. So if we can then focus our resources on just one part of the market, or as the market as a whole, we would waste a lot of time and money, because a lot of those consumers would not be interested by the particular product that we were offering. Only part of the market would recognize themselves. So that's why we need to try and identify those people who would recognize themselves and focus in on them directly. So the objects of segmentation then are to be able then to adapt our product to the specific needs and to differentiate it from existing competitor products trying to target the same segment. This will give us a temporary commercial advantage, which we may be able to turn into a lasting commercial advantage. Also, we need to segment our markets in order to determine which customers the company will serve. So segmentation, as I've said already, is followed by this idea of targeting, making a choice as to the most appropriate segments which are the most likely to want and need your product in the short term. So by doing that, we're hoping to optimize our profit by selling the right product to the right customers and looking for this ideal perfect match, which gives rise to the win-win exchange. So what criteria can I use for identifying the different segments? We can see here, for example, in a total population, there are different groups of people, and I can try and identify these segments using the characteristics, the behavior, and the values. So all of the elements that we've been studying when we've looked at consumer behavior and both the internal and the external factors affecting these decisions and attitudes and behaviors. So our principal segmentation variables are going to depend very much on variables that are relevant to your company and relevant to the type of product that you are trying to put into the market. But globally, there are 4 big options that we have, which are here. So firstly, geographic is talking about obviously the geographic differences of regions, etc. Demographic is talking about age profiles and incomes. Psychographic, you remember, is talking about lifestyles and attitudes and personality. And behavioral refers much more to the actual behavior of the potential consumers with regard to our product. So we're going to look at each of these variables in a bit more detail. So first of all then, this idea of geography and demographics and psychographics is very much focused on who. So it's centered on the consumer himself and the different characteristics of the consumer. The behavioral approach focuses on what and why, and so that is much more linked to the actual behavior of the consumer regarding a certain product rather than the characteristics of the consumer himself. So let's look at these geographic segmentation variables. These can be choosing your segments according to your world region or your country. So you can have different products for Africa, Asia, Europe, etc. You can bring it down to a country or a region. So it could be Île-de-France, PACA, Brittany. It could be by city or population size. So you can segment your market by particular towns, Paris, Lyon, Lille, or towns under 5,000, towns between 10 and 20,000. You can focus also on the density of the population and either go for urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas. It all depends on what is appropriate for you. And you can also get into the idea of climatic zones, so whether it is tropical or the geographic countryside, whether it's coast or mountain, on the seasonality, warm, cold, wet, dry, summer, winter. So let's look again quickly at geographic. So for example, the region, we could decide to focus our particular product only on the Brittany region, and then we would have a set of consumer variables that deal particularly with the Breton purchaser. On the other hand, we could look at population and where the population is identified and dense. So we could perhaps choose to focus our markets initially on highly populated areas such as the north or on the south coast. Or perhaps if we were interested in leisure walking activities, perhaps we would be, on the contrary, looking for areas where there is very little population, because that's where a lot of the walking and countryside activities are taking place. We could also look at the landscape. If we are into skiing, then obviously we need to go to where the mountains are and the different regions. If we want to go into sailing, then we need to be along the coastal areas with our campsites, for example. And finally, you may take into consideration the rainfall. So, for example, a company such as Whoopi that created indoor activities for children based its installation on areas where there was a high demand for indoor activities because of high rainfall. On the other hand, if you are thinking about building a campsite or whatever, then you maybe want to go, or an aquatic park, then perhaps you want to be in a dry area where you can be outside most of the time. So these can be helpful factors, geographic factors, for segmenting your market. Let's look now at demographic. So here we're talking about things like the age and the gender. So obviously teenagers or male or female, so they can be a way of targeting and creating different products for either men or women. We can be looking at life cycle and family size. So things like Parent magazine is clearly aiming at all of the segments with families. We can obviously also look at income and occupation and education and generation with, again, certain types of either highly intellectual type of products or very easily accessible, etc. And finally, in some countries, we can legally use things such as race and religion to segment and to create specific offerings. So in the United States, for example, you can very clearly have magazines that are aimed at the black population in particular. It's not the case in France. So again, this would be another case, examples of different age segmentation. So UCPA, that you may know, has different products or services catering for the 6 to 17-year-olds, and then for the adults from 18 to 39. Smartbox, again, also has a range of products which correspond to different age profiles, so either weekend as a couple or activities for your kids and teenagers. And they also have segmentation according to the value, how much you want to spend. This income segmentation also affects the price and the quality of the products that you put into the market. So you can have a Rolex or a Swatch watch depending on not only the income but also the attitudes and the desirability of owning each of those products. So a company such as Renault, for example, will in its product range have different products which correspond to different income segments. So on the one hand, you may get the high price range talisman type products, and on the other hand, you would get the Twingo and Clio products, which are much more start of the range. If they want to take it even further, they can also and have created another brand called Dacia, which is the low-cost product range with their Logan, for example. That is also a deliberate choice to keep the Renault name slightly isolated from the cheaper products so that they do not give the impression that Renault is cheap, but Dacia is cheap. So another way of segmenting is what we've called the psychographic or lifestyle segmentation. So psychographic segmentation divides buyers into different groups based on social class, lifestyles, values, and personality all mixed together. So these social classes and lifestyles determine the way you interact with your life and the way your personality is put together. So people who are in a similar demographic group can have very different psychographic characteristics. It's not because all of the young students share the same age. You all come mostly from the Breton region. You share the same education, but that doesn't mean that you are identical as a segment, because you may have very different psychographic characteristics, different lifestyles, different ambitions, etc. So the same people, for example, in quite a rich profile demographically, could either go for luxury cars, luxury hotels and Nespresso machines, or they could, because of their values, go for Tesla cars or camping holidays or organic food. So that's differences in terms of the lifestyle which add an extra dimension and which are more powerful for segmenting the market than purely the demographic characteristics. There's a famous model of psychographic segmentation in the US called the VALS framework, and they basically look at two criteria, so resources and this idea of motivation. So the resources can either be high resources, so high incomes, or lower incomes. And then they looked at this idea of motivations. So you can be driven by ideals, you can be driven by achievement, and you can be driven by self-expression. And that enabled them to come up with these 8 different categories of people, which are typically representative of the US population. So, for example, a believer relies on ideals. So he's into spirituality, he doesn't want change, he believes adverts, he belongs to a community. So he has quite a low income, but he is motivated by ideals. If we move into the innovator category, so they have high resources and they believe in achievement as a motivation. So they experiment, they're confident, they have international exposure, they are future looking, and they trust science. And that is our innovator profile. On the other hand, an experiencer, for example, again has quite a high resources, but he is very much motivated by self-expression. So he wants everything, he follows fashion, he loves to be physically active and to be in charge of his life, and he seeks sensations. So each of these different characteristics have certain attitudes and profiles and motivating factors that will make them go towards one or other different types of consumption. So we've looked at the different aspects of segmentation relating specifically to consumer characteristics. Now in the 4th category, called behavioral, we're looking very much at how the consumer behaves according to the product or service itself. So we're answering the question what and why. So behavioral segmentation, as I said, is not based on the consumer characteristics per se, but on their past behavior regarding a set of products. And consumers can be divided into groups according to their knowledge, their attitude towards, their use of, or their response to a product. And companies can use your sales statistics to determine segments based on what consumers have done in the past. So these behavioral segmentation criteria can be divided into different types. So firstly, the benefits that people are seeking or looking for. So you're looking for quality, you're looking for service, you're looking for speed. The occasions on which you want to consume, so it could be a special occasion like an anniversary or a holiday or Christmas. There are 2 related to user status, so you could be a traditional user, a regular user, or a first-time user. And a usage rate, so a heavy user or a very occasional user. And then loyalty status, which is either no loyalty or very strong loyalty. So let's have a look at one of these. The benefits you seek are one of the key areas which determine typically purchases for washing powders, shampoos, toothpastes, because you're looking for particular functions or benefits of the product. So for example, toothpaste, I can be looking for full protection, or I can be looking for whitening my teeth, or I could even be looking for problem solving with sensitive gums and bleeding. Again, on the other hand, with my washing powder, I can look for a particular washing powder for colors, a particular washing powder for wool, a particular washing powder for black clothes, and also a handy hand washing package for when I'm not using my washing machine. So those are all types of creating different markets by focusing on what the benefit is that the consumer wants to achieve. Behavioral focuses again on the events. So Kinder Ferrero has obviously their everyday range of products, but they will also bring out special offerings, special packaging aimed at these particular moments in time when the sales are very high. So that is the Kinder pack, and then they have the Christmas version, and they have the surprises, the eggs version. User status is all about your loyalty. So a company such as Flying Blue can have a different loyalty scheme depending on how frequently you travel with the company. Again, so that encourages the users to repeat the purchase of the brand. It rewards the most frequent customers, and it nurtures your best customers and gives them something extra that makes them want to stay even more loyal with you. And then we get what we call multiple segmentation, which is going to use several of these segmentation techniques at the same time. So that can be the star, for example, that we know here in Rennes, uses geographic segmentation. So we have different offerings for Rennes, Rennes Métropole, and the star with the TER, combined offerings. We have demographic segmentation depending on your age, your status in terms of being a school child or a student, whether you're unemployed or whether you are retired. And then the idea of behavioral through the usage rate, whether it's an everyday event where you have a monthly use as much as you want, or a ticket by ticket if it's very occasional or a rare time, or a subscription which allows you only to travel during the school time, etc. So at the end of the day, we're trying to create what we call a segmentation table of profiles or personas. So this is what it can look like, and down the side here we have all of the different criteria. So we try and estimate the size of the segment, the demographics, the geographic segmentation, the lifestyle, and the benefits sought, and what we call the value proposition. So what can the company offer at the top? And then across the top we try and portray typical consumers, and we try and give them a name which summarizes a little bit more about who they are. So this would be an example for a company such as Hellmann's Mayonnaise, which is a key company, a bit like Amora in the UK. And the first segment that we identified could be called career and gourmet. So these, in terms of demographics, would be well-educated professional women, married or single, but probably an age 40+ profile. We can imagine that they would live in a nice green suburb, perhaps with a house or a garden, or quite a chic city apartment. They have an active international lifestyle, eating out, and appreciate a lot of different culture. And when they're talking about mayonnaise and their use, they're looking in particular for an authentic taste and quality ingredients. And what we can propose to them is a nice, creamy, authentic flavor. And you come up with a typical, nice, elegant products such as mayonnaise. Another segment that uses mayonnaise, we could nominate them as being kids and chips. So these are a big population. They're more working class. They tend to be younger. They have several children at home. They may live in a semi-detached or a terraced house or in a housing estate. Their life is based on cooking food fast, running to school, juggling between work, the kids' activities, football matches, TVs. So they're into speed and child-friendly things that their kids are going to want to eat easily. So they want easy-to-use products and they want a much more neutral taste. So we may develop the squeezy bottle version for them. And then finally, again, we've got another category which I called muesli mum. So the idea of muesli is this idea of organic. I could call them the organic mum, for example. So they are also a potential segment, quite well educated, married, maybe with high-aged kids. Again, they've got a house, a garden, perhaps they grow their own vegetables. And their lifestyle is about outdoor activities with the family, healthy, responsible, and they are looking particularly for health and for taste. And again, the clear focus that we could use for that type of product would either be the very light version or even the vegan mayonnaise made without eggs, because that is their lifestyle. So we can see then that you can be creating different profiles of consumers for the different segments which you will try to identify using all of the research that you have captured. And then the idea later of targeting is to determine potentially which of these three segments is the most relevant for a particular product launch that we have in mind. So the key to successful segmentation, this ideal segment must be measurable. I must need to have some idea of size. The segment must be large enough to earn a profit. So I need a certain critical mass of consumers. It must be sustainable. People must be anchored in that behavior and in their needs, because I need the segment to still last in the future. It's got to be internally homogeneous, so that means within the segment the customers share the same preferences about the product qualities. And it must be externally heterogeneous, so that means the customers in this profile must be very distinct from the customers in another segment, so that they are two clearly different personality types with different needs. So the segment must also give us the opportunity to create a specific differentiated marketing mix so that we can adapt our product particularly to the needs of the segment in mind. And finally, I must be able to find ways of communicating with that particular segment so that I can tell my story and get myself heard by the consumers in that segment. So that means I also need to understand what radio stations they listen to, what magazines they read, and find a way of reaching them for my communication. So that's an introduction to segmentation. We'll see in the future how we move from segmenting to targeting your particular audience. Thank you for watching. Now please watch again and do the learning exercises.